Hello, everyone. My name is Natalia, Talia Bethany Barreau, and welcome to another episode of Talia Talks. Today, I have some amazing guests with me here to talk about the election of 2020. This upcoming election is a really important one, and I thought what better way to come back from my hiatus than with something that's super important and something that's super relevant for today. So I have my guests with me, and I'm going to give them a chance to each introduce themselves and tell a little bit about themselves, who they are, and what they do. So, in no particular order. Who wants to go first?
I could go ahead and jump in. All right. So first and foremost, Talia, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this platform and this such important discussion. My name is Easton Harrison. I am a community organizer here in Broward County, South Florida. And I basically go into community and, with different issues, I'm basically an advocate. And I've helped out with community programming. And I also, every now and then, work on a few political campaigns. Some of the issues that I like to have worked around, has been civic engagement, also mentorship, education, and also history here within Broward County, particularly local history. So super excited to be a part of this talk because civic engagement is one of the main pillars of my work, and excited to discuss this here with other panelists.
Anyone can go next.
Yeah, I'm gonna let the ladies go first.
Okay, I will go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Romelus. I am a commissioner in the city of Boynton Beach. I ran for office when I was 27 years old and pregnant with my second son. So I have been now in office for the last going on 5 years now. It is an absolute pleasure to serve my community and to be one of the youngest members of my commission. I'm also the only woman on my commission, so bringing those two perspectives to a city that is about nearly 70% white and really just has a large community of African Americans and Black people and Haitian people and just all types of diversity. It's important to continue to represent that. So it is a pleasure for me to serve in that role. And outside of my political role, I am a mother of two. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. I own my own business that is geared around politics and educating individuals about politics, how to either get into it, how to excel while in it, and how to transition properly out of it. The company is called PolitiCalm. And yeah, that's all I have for now. So looking forward to having this discussion with my fellow panelists. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia, for having me.
Okay. Lisa, you're going to be next. You were volunteered next.
Yes, I'll jump in. So thank you so much, Natalia, for creating this space and inviting me here. So my name is Nafessah Attah. I'm currently a 3L at Howard University School of Law. So in my last year of law school, I'm born and raised in Broward County. So it's like home to me, but I'm currently in DC. I came to law school to be an advocate for communities that looked like me, especially growing up in Broward County. So learning about the law and also experiencing what's happening in this country now, it's kind of bittersweet, but I hope to kind of use the skills and advocacy skills that I've learned at Howard thus far to be an advocate for my community, whether it's constitutional rights or being a litigator, which is my goal after graduating. So yeah, some of my interests, I guess I dance on the side, trying to get into yoga. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and ready to engage with everyone. Thank you.
All right, my name is Patricio Coicou. I am currently a grad student at Florida Atlantic University studying public administration. My kind of experiences have been a little bit more kind of dabbling with a lot of different things. I've interned with the city of Delray Beach. I currently sit on the FAU's School of Public Administration Advisory Board. I have also worked in a federal government capacity for the IRS and the Social Security Administration as well. And for me, my future endeavors is that I actually want to become a public policy analyst after all the schooling is said and done. So that's kind of me, short and brief.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you all. So we're gonna go ahead and dive in. Does anyone want to talk about why voting is important to them and why it's something that they're passionate about?
Well, I'll kick it off simply because of the story that I have to share about voting and how voting is significant, and how voting and a community turning out and voting allowed a 27-year-old Haitian immigrant, pregnant Black girl who's never run for office before to come in and beat a white 66-year-old former firefighter. I was told that there was no possible way that I could win, but in the process of in really just motivating and invigorating individuals to take advantage of this right that we all have, well, those of us who are eligible, this right that we have to vote, it really allowed for history to be made in this city. So when I ran at that time, the turnout had mostly been about maybe 600 or 700 at the most. And when I, decided that I was going to run, I was told that by political analysts and people who know the game, that as a Haitian woman, as a Black woman, I could only potentially get about 34 votes. And so we set out on a mission to prove them wrong. And we did. By the time election day came, I received 2,000 plus votes that election night. And that was because we went out and we educated and we motivated and inspired a group of people who had never really voted in a city election before. And I'm sure we'll touch on this topic later on, but a lot of people vote every 4 years for the president and then they move on. They think that that's it. And we educated them and helped them understand that there is so much more to voting and to politics than just voting for your president every 4 years. And we really activated a whole base of people who had never really existed before, and we turned all types of heads to the point where we were blasted in newspapers and said that we were doing something illegal. And at the end of the day, all it was that we helped wake up a community that has felt like they weren't being represented. And when they saw somebody that could talk like them and look like them and understand where they're coming from, they were motivated and they got out there and they voted, and we were able to represent another portion of the community in Boynton Beach. So that's just to show you, my story is just to show you the power of voting and how in a race where the pundits and the experts thought that only 34 people would turn out and vote for me, we turned out 2,000. Whereas in previous elections, there had only been about 600 to 700 people that had voted overall. I got 2,000 to vote for me alone, and the overall turnout was about 4,000. So it really makes a huge difference when a community of people decides that we're going to vote either somebody in or vote somebody out. Makes a huge difference. And you really do have true power by the ballot that you cast.
Wow, that's such an inspirational story. And it's really inspiring to hear that you were able to incite something in people that they hadn't known about before, maybe didn't have all the knowledge or the tools. So that's really inspiring to hear. Does anyone else want to touch on why they think why voting is important to them?
Yeah, I guess just from the legal lens, it took us a while to even get the right to vote, right? Like there were so many barriers that were put into place. Only white male landowners could vote, women getting the right to vote, Black people getting the right to vote. But then there are barriers to that. We have poll taxes, we have literacy tests. Even today in 2020, we have voter suppression. We have felons not being able to have the right to vote, right? So at every stage, we've been hit with another barrier, all to prevent people that look like you and me from getting to the poll. And why is that? You're only going to protect something that's important. If voting did not matter, they wouldn't have tried at every point to stop us from getting to the poll. So it's discouraging when I hear people my age saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter. We don't need to vote. It's nothing is going to change. But voting is not the end all solution, but it's the vehicle to get to what you want. You may not like things now, but the only way you're going to be able to see favorable results that help people in your community is voting. I mean, and localizing your voting. Like Christina said before, it's not just about every 4 years. It's about your state attorney. It's about your local commissioners, your mayor, your governor. I mean, these are people that enact laws and regulations that rule and govern how you live every single day. And the more we realize that it took us so long to even get to this point, people died for us to be able to cast our ballot, there should be power in that, and we should not take that right for granted, because people fought long and hard for us to get there, and it's truly important, and the only way that we can facilitate institutional change is voting, localized and also all the way up to the national level. So I just hope people understand voting is so important.
Anyone else? Do you guys have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I wanted to add in, I completely 100% agree with what Nafessah and Christina said there. I believe voting also is important simply because, you know, it lets people look at you and take you as a group of people serious. You know, your voice is heard. So, you know, whenever you look at political campaigns or even think something as simple as a census, it's all a numbers game. So when they look at that community over there, what are they there to be afraid of if those people aren't going to vote anyways? So then, you know, people get walked on, these communities get walked on, and then the people in the communities aren't educated on how important voting is or what voting can do. They think it's just every 4 years like the president. So they're like, man, why is it that when I vote for Obama, nothing changes? Because voting is happening on every single level. And it's not even just candidates. You have to vote for local amendments, local charter questions. You have to vote, you know, a local referendum. You know, are people going to raise your taxes or not? These are things you can vote on. So I think why voting is so important to me and overall is because if people really understand voting, it really localizes and makes the whole thing a bit more simplified when people see voting on an everyday level. I also know that our youth has a huge potential in being involved civically, and I get upset every political cycle when I work on a political campaign, and there's tons of young people that just aren't motivated to vote, to the point where, you know, you target certain precincts and voters, and you know, it's probably not the best thing to do to target a 35 and under demographic and convince the campaign to spend money that way, because they're like, I'm not convinced, Easton, that these people are going to vote. They never do. So if only people could know that when you vote, your voice is literally heard and you're creating a megaphone telling people that I am here.
Okay, so I guess I'll be the last one to speak. What I tell individuals who are on the fence about voting is I tell them that things that affect you at the local level are interconnected with things that happen at the state level and the federal level. I know personally, I went to 3 protests this year concerning the issues that's been happening around the country with police brutality with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. I tell people that you elect sheriffs who create policies of enforcement on how they're going to be policing their community. I also tell them that at the federal level, you have right now attempts at reform in the House of Representatives, one of which is to end qualified immunity. And in that thing that happens with qualified immunity and how police officers are tried, you have a president saying that if he ever gets a bill that has reform that includes that, he's going to veto it. And then you also have the president candidate, Joe Biden, who says that he will add it into his proposal or agenda when he's talking about police reform. You also have propositions that end up going on your ballot that may not happen during a gubernatorial election or a presidential election, that might happen in a midterm election. These are things that you need to constantly be looking at, because some states or some politicians might slip it in knowing that the voter turnout will be low and it might fail. This is why you always need to be abreast on things that are coming up, because you never know how important it's going to be and how it's going to affect you at that time.
Those are all really good points. I think that those are all really strong and meaningful, just different perspectives on why voting is so important. And each of you have had your own different experiences, and those experiences are part of the reasons why I brought you here today. So if anyone wants to talk about their experiences while working/operating through this most recent or upcoming election, and what that's been like for you and your experiences that you've had.
I'll kick this one off. So this has actually been one of the, I think the way I can best describe it is it's been one of the most highest highs and lowest lows campaigns I've ever been a part of, simply because there's just so much, and there's so much coming at you. And I think of the people who are actually, the voters themselves. Like, for somebody like me, who's a politician, like, I'm invested. Like, I am in this thing. I am dug deep. I'm. There's no way to, like, I'm sold. Right, I'm in. But the people who are just normal people who just are kind of, dabbling and kind of maybe watching some CNN here and there, or they watch the debates here and there. The sad part is just there's so much being thrown at them, and it's almost intentional in a way. This is I think the best thing that Trump and his administration do well. They inundate the news in order to cover the real problem, and to really kind of just sugarcoat the real problems. They kind of just throw stuff at you to keep you distracted. He's got COVID this week. Russia, the hoax. It's like everything's always just, and then people are just like, you know what? I'm done. Like, and they just check out. And so that's been, I think, for me, what I've been noticing and experiencing, and trying to help people stay in an engaged fashion that doesn't get them overwhelmed, and they still feel like, you know what, at the end of the day, regardless of all the noise, here's the mission. The mission is to, I'm going to get biased here, but the mission is to get people, the right people who need to go, get them out, and then get the right people in. And I think the other thing that also is relevant in terms of what I believe it was Easton that was saying, that this 35 and under community, this population, where we're just feeling like it's a toss-up between the two candidates, because it's like, what difference does it make? Because they're both crazy. And yes, to a certain extent, that is true. Like, I'm going to admit, I'm going to own it, because I'm part of that 35 and under group. And it is the reality that there is just so much that's still wanted from even the side that we want to win. Like, they're still lacking so much, right? There's still so much controversy around the two candidates that represent that particular ticket. So there's a lot of confusion, but at the end of the day, what I could say to anybody who's listening and who's contemplating what this election means and how it affects them is just that in the 4 years that this last administration has been in office, hundreds of judges have been appointed who do not look at the world the way people like you, who look like you and I, look at the world. Thousands of business owners and people who, I would even, let's forget thousands, millions of business owners who look like us have been put out of business because COVID dollars weren't enough to save us throughout this pandemic. And yet the individuals who ran this country said, oh, we're just going to keep things under wraps because we don't want to scare people, but gave nobody any indication that something this major was on the way. So there's so much to really dig deep into this particular election and what it means and how it translates moving forward. But the thing that I always try to be cognizant of, and that I try to remind those that fit within that target demographic that Easton was talking about, that 35 and under group, is please be mindful that the people who run this country, right, the people who currently run this country, who are making laws that will affect us for the rest of our lives, they're going to be dead in like 10 to 20 years. And yet you, who are still alive and who will very much be alive probably, unfortunately are playing no active role in that decision-making process. And so you're letting people who will be gone in 10 to 20 years dictate your life for the next 30 to 50 years. That's the problem that this election should send alarm bells in so many people's heads and get them to run to the polls, not even walk, crawl, think about. You should be running to these polls and getting your vote in ASAP, because that's the future that's on the line here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go. Perfect. Jump in.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to, not even piggyback, but just totally echo what Christina said there. 100%, 100%. Just off of my experience, I want to touch on campaigning. And then I could even get into the whole thing with how youth are looking at this election this time, how exhausted they feel. And these are based off of things that I've heard. All right, so I can only be true to how exhausted they feel to see how we go from 2 candidates to 2016 to now 2 candidates that they probably thought they wasn't going to see here. But wanted to touch on this overall, the whole campaigning experience has changed forever. Me, when I work on campaigns, I'm not coming in as a campaign manager. I'm not no treasurer. I come in as field operations, knocking on doors is my thing. I work with volunteers, and I like voter contact and outreach. And when COVID hit, when COVID happened, all of that just completely changed, completely went down. I didn't know if myself was going to even be in the job with certain contracts and people. So the main theme with that is that people had to get creative. People definitely had to get creative. We had to find a new way how to get to the voters. And it wasn't always about money either. Now, when you're talking to them, money isn't a part of that, because you can't ask them for money in the middle of a crisis. So I've been on campaigns where you're actually trying to tell the candidates, they're asking, well, what do we do? What do we do? How do we, what are our talking points going to be? How do we pivot? Say, all you have to do is just be you. You being you. You seen candidates essentially became community organizers. Now everybody's at a food distribution. Everybody's doing some type of community cleanup or whatever. And, for the first time, in order to be a likable contending candidate, was to actually be yourself and be of community, and not have to think about the other logistics of a campaign that comes with that. So I personally believe that there's something there that could be tapped into. That's the bright side of it. The sad part is that, getting the voters was a lot harder. So that's with that. The second part is that this election cycle has been a super, super interesting one, just the primaries alone. And now coming into this right here, we're talking about and I'm gonna speak from political parties, the Democratic Party on a whole. What is our identity? We feel a change there, but how are we gonna adapt, and who's gonna adapt first? And I think what Christina said about these people being older, dictating our lives, that was so powerful, because I've been feeling this type of itch in my brain, like, why are so many old people determining how we go about doing things? We're the youngest ones working hardest in the workforce. We just contribute so much to this society, even with culture. And that goes back to why I'm upset that we're not voting. But also, we should not be putting our future in the hands of people who, one, don't view the world like us, and two, are no longer, will no longer be around in the next 10 years. That was a perfect point. We know that there's the Constitution, not even the country, still states, constitutions that were written by white people, white men, no people of color, and no women, dictating how you're supposed to govern yourselves. And we're still under that here in 2020. And as much as you feel like we've progressed, we've had a Martin King, we've had a Malcolm X, whatever, it may feel like it's progression, but until the laws of the land change, you won't really feel it. And that's why when we see people get shot down, we feel frustrated. It's the laws. It's the laws that are in place. And you can only change that if you get engaged and if you actually vote and you, again, let them know that you're here. I think this election cycle, more people are looking at that. People are actually saying out of strategy, you know what? Yeah, Joe Biden probably wasn't my pick in the primaries, but I'm still voting. You know why? Because it's a larger strategy. It's a larger strategy. Biden isn't on the ticket. Climate change is on the ticket. This is on the ticket. So we're turning it more away from the person and the personality to the issues. And that's what I particularly like about this election cycle. There's a lot of cons to it, but I like to focus on the positive side of things. And that's just my take on that.
I want to kind of go off of what Easton just said. Like, that's the thing to do as well. Think of what's really on the ballot. Climate change is on the ballot. Police reform is on the ballot. What else? Like, I think we could just go ahead and list them out here right now. Police brutality is on the ballot, right? Racism is on the ballot.
Small businesses is on the ballot.
Proud Boys is on the ballot. Like, what else? Keep naming them. Like, that's how you get people to turn out. It's not people. I feel like we underestimate people sometimes. People know, like, to a certain extent, people know what voting is and how it works and all that, but they just don't get, and I think Easton made a great point, they just don't get, why is it relevant to them? Make it relevant to them, and you get the turnout you need. And it's not about Joe Biden. It's not about Kamala Harris, as much as I love her. It's not about her, right? It's about what they represent. And if we do a better job at making sure that information gets across, to every single person that's watching and listening and paying attention, this election and hopefully this country will be in a better trajectory.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of jump in on when you're saying that you have to think about like these different creative ways to kind of reach people. And as much as you're saying this, I also want people to understand that, organizers out there are not the only ones trying to have creative ways on, imposing themselves in this election. Because I recently read about that in the state of California, where my mom lives, the Republican Party is actually setting up polling boxes where you put in your ballots, and they're fake. They're not. So they have official polling stations and official like ballot boxes where you can actually put your ballots in, and they're putting fake ones in there, and they're using some sort of law where California allows people to harvest the ballots, meaning that you can go out to different citizens who may be unable to actually go to the polls themselves and actually pick up their ballots and turn it in. And so they've actually admitted to illegally setting up these fake official ballot boxes that are located, like, when you drop in like your mail at a USPS, like little box there on the side of the street. And so people are putting them in, and they're actually putting signs on these boxes saying that it's an official sanctioned box that is allowed to be there. So when the Republicans come and, pick up these ballot boxes, they're not actually telling us exactly what they're doing with them, whether they're throwing them away, whether they're actually going through certain procedures. And then on top of that, when you set up ballot harvesting, you actually have to stay within certain guidelines and rules that the state legislatures have provided to pick up these ballots from your neighbors or, the elderly or stuff like that. And they're not providing that either. So you have to think of effective ways to get people to the polls, but you also have to stay abreast at what measures are people actually doing to suppress your vote as well.
Yeah, Fisa, did you want to touch on your experience really quickly before I move on to the next question?
No, I think everyone said everything.
Yeah, and Christina brought up a really good point. I think that there's this narrative that Black people, people of color, immigrants have no idea about politics, have no idea what's going on, and that's just not the case. If you go to your average barbershop, you'll hear talks about if you go to the park and see people playing chess or soccer games, you'll hear them arguing about politics. So I think that narrative is false. I think that there's just like a lot of misconceptions. So what are some other misconceptions that you guys have heard or about when it comes to voting?
Yeah, if I could just kick this one off. I wanted to say, well, first to kind of pick up where you were saying as far as people know. People definitely know. As far as the immigrant side of things, my family is from Jamaica. I was the first in my family to be born here, and they definitely know about politics. It's just a matter of once they get here, if they're sold on this system or not, and if they want to engage. But they most definitely know about politics. They come from a place where politics is a very serious thing, you know, and voting is a very serious thing.
It's life or death.
And I'm sure Christina can, yes, it's life or death.
Right?
Literally, like I'm telling you. So, and a lot of people don't know that. So I definitely think that from that instance, we definitely know. I have people going back to that target demographic, 35 and under. I had a friend the other day was talking about educating me on a law that passed in California. He actually knew more than me about it. And he was so excited to tell me because, you know, he usually know that I'm usually up on game, and he's like, yeah, man, but he was talking about, you know, the new cannabis laws and whatnot. So he was like very much like well-versed on it. This other person I know was so much well-versed on what's going on with rent control and all these laws around housing and whatnot, more than the people I know that sit on a lot of these boards and committees dealing with that. So that was when an epiphany went off in my head when I realized that the people that are going through the issues by default are more educated on the issues than the people that are making the decisions about the issues. Meaning that somebody that has to make rent every first of the month understands what the issue is. Somebody who has to apply for a business loan understands what the issue is. The site is too hard to read. And before that feedback gets to the people who's creating the site and administrating those services, it's way too much of a gap. And that's why voting is so important and getting involved is so important, because a lot of times when you see things changed, it's either somebody got elected that was once that person that brought up these ideas, like, yo, this is how people are really looking at it. Or somebody got hired in like local government coming with new ideas and things like that. And a lot of that happened with the census this time around. I noticed locally. So I think it's super, super, super important for us to be engaged for those reasons. And lastly, another myth that I've heard about voting that really gets me is that my vote doesn't count or my vote doesn't matter. And with that, I've seen personally when they count the votes precincts by precincts, you can see somebody won this precinct by 12 votes, that precinct by 8 votes. It looks like it adds up and it's like, hundreds of thousands of votes, my votes don't matter. But, you know, I've seen where 12 votes have decided an election. I've seen where somebody think that, this candidate won, and then they count all of the ballots. And then they say, actually, this candidate won. And I think Christina put up the number one. I've seen elections where I've heard like one vote. And imagine, somebody is thinking like, dang, I could have voted, or I could have convinced this person and made sure they got to the poll. These are real life situations. And now people are in office that probably should not have been simply because of that. So this is one of the biggest myths of voting. We can go on about the myths of voting, you know, vote by mail and all of these other stuff.
So, man, I don't even know where to start. And Easton just kind of like sent me on like a trip, because I'm like, man, I could hit on all the things he just talked about too. But first and foremost is let's talk about getting engaged in your political or your civic system. Being engaged does not mean all of a sudden now you are a politician or you're going to be running for office next year. Easton, who is in this panel right now, is probably one of the most powerful people that's in this panel right now. Why? Because he's a community activist. Community activists sometimes are more powerful and have way more impact than the politicians themselves. He just made that great point. The people who are on the ground, and that's why local government is my favorite form of government, because the government that is closest to the people is the government that is the most effective. F the presidential election, F the Congress people, I'm sorry for my language, but F them all. The people who are your mayors, your city commissioners, your soil and water preservation people, your, local state attorney, like those people who are, you see them or you're going to probably engage with them in some way, you're going to probably run across them at Walmart somewhere. They're the people you need to be paying attention to the most. And they're the people you need to be engaged with the most. Why? Because they dictate how much your water bill is. They dictate how much your light bill is. They dictate if that pothole is going to be fixed on your street. They dictate if that light pole that's been out for months and people are selling dope right under it because nobody sees their business. They dictate if that light pole gets fixed or not the president, not the people in Congress who don't do diddly squat. Okay. Y'all get me passionate. I'm sorry. So it's really just about, you know, dispelling those myths. And as Easton said, like, get to know these people and engage with them. Let them know what the real experience is. The only reason I've been effective is because I come from regular people. Like, my parents are Haitian. My dad was a boat person. He came here on a boat, right? I get what that means. And we grew up, my dad made $27,000 a year, and a household of 5 survived off of that. My mom was a, you know, stay-at-home mom, and we survived off of that. So I know the struggle, okay? And that I probably still was more privileged than other people. So when I came into office, I brought all that with me. That's why we need more people like us in office, because we think differently, and we represent a different community and a different mindset, right? Like, you can't tell me that it is okay for us to raise taxes on the lowest of the low. And I fight against that. You can't tell me it's okay for a developer to come into a city and bank all the money. No, I fight against that all the time in my commission role. And when it comes to affordable housing, that's my baby. Like, that is what I fight for all the time on the commission. Because of me, every single project that's now coming to the city of Boynton Beach has affordable housing built within it, or they're paying us something for us to take those funds and put it somewhere else to help people with affordable housing. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it's because I got into office that I did that. My predecessor, he didn't do that. That wasn't his concern, because he didn't care about affordable housing. He didn't care where people who look like us live, because that wasn't his problem. So when you talk about, well, voting doesn't matter, you know, I don't need to know who, I don't know who my mayor is. Who cares? What is he going to do for me? I have to take a deep breath and check you, because these fake news or these fake facts or whatever is what's killing our community day in and day out, because we just believe the hype that other people want us to believe. And please realize they want us to believe this crap, okay? Because it keeps us where we are, and it keeps them doing what they want to do, and keeps Donald Trump paying $750 in taxes every year. Just saying.
Yeah.
All right.
Guys aware? Oh, yeah. Perfect. Jump in. I don't even have to moderate.
So,
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a narrative, because I do hear people saying sometimes, even jokingly or casually in conversation, that what point or what difference will it make for me voting or not? So going back to when Charlie Crist was governor, and people who had went to jail and served their time were seeking to get their voting rights restored. Charlie Crist actually set in some sort of process where people can actually go through and get their voting rights returned to them. When Rick Scott came in and he became the governor of the state of Florida, he undid all of that and created an arbitrary panel that he sat on to actually grant, clemency to people who were imprisoned before, felons. Charlie Crist, within his time as governor, probably granted a couple 100,000 people the right to vote back. Rick Scott, in his 8 years, granted less than 4,000. So now when you had Ron DeSantis and Andrew Gillum running against each other, that vote count was so close that Ron DeSantis got, I think it was like 50 point something percent, and Andrew Gillum got like 49 point something percent. And had just say half of those people who went in front of that panel in front of Rick Scott to get their voting rights restored to them been granted the right to vote, we probably would have Andrew Gillum as the governor right now. So this is why I'm saying that your vote matters. And even if you think that your politicians aren't listening to what you want, because, at the time that Rick Scott was governor, you had more than 50% of people, including Republicans, in favor of granting the right to vote to ex-felons through some sort of process, some due process, right? But because that happened, we essentially had people who were ex-felons taking up this issue themselves and making a citizens referendum put on the ballot so that we can actually vote for felons to have their voting rights restored. So what we essentially did is we said, bump the legislators because they don't want to listen to us. We're just going to do it ourselves. And we actually had a whole group of people throughout the entire state of Florida get enough signatures to have that put on as a referendum, and that's how it got passed. So when you say your vote doesn't really matter, there's examples, tons of them, that says that you can actually usurp or go around legislators to have something that you're really passionate about put on the ballot.
If I could just add to that, because that really goes into my next point about one of the common mishaps I've heard is that, I didn't vote for Trump, but he's here, and in 4 years, like, he's gone. Like, there's no permanent changes. Like, and another one bites the dust, new person comes in. But the judiciary, like, people forget about that level, that these are people who are appointed for lifetime appointments on the federal bench, making judge-made law. At this point, Trump has appointed a quarter of all judges on the federal bench have been appointed by Trump. That surpasses any other president in the United States history at this point in their presidency. Only 4 years, a quarter of all judges. That is huge. When we talk about issues like qualified immunity, that is judge-made law. That's nowhere in the Constitution. The Congress didn't make that. That is judge-made law. When we talk about issues with abortion rights, all of these tests about undue burden, things about, trying to eviscerate Roe v. Wade, that's all judge-made law, right? So when you vote for people, you're also voting for people who appoint these judges to the bench that then get to make decisions that turn into judge-made law and are here to stay for years to come. So it's really important. And tying back even on the local level. So in 2018, we had an amendment in Florida trying to restore felons' rights. It passed. However, what came in now? Now they wanted to say that, oh, well, you actually got to pay off all your court fines in order to have your right. So what happened? We sued the governor and said this is essentially violating the Constitution because it's creating a poll tax, which essentially it is. You got to pay money before you can vote, unconstitutional. But what did the 11th Circuit find? It went all the way up to the 11th Circuit. And they found actually, no, it is constitutional. You got to pay all your fines back. So now we voted, the people of Florida have voted. This is what we want. But they add another barrier to the point where now we have thousands of people who have prior convictions who still cannot vote in this election. Judges came up with that decision. Let's also keep in mind that all of those people on the Florida Supreme Court, all the way up to the 11th Circuit, have been Trump-appointed judges or judges appointed by George Bush. So these are people who are making laws and are changing laws. It's not in the Constitution, judge-made laws that are going to affect us young people, for the years to come. So when people say that, oh, another one comes in, another one leaves, like, a new bus coming in, everybody changes, new party, that's just not the case, because the judiciary is constantly being changed. They're packing the court, and these judges are making decisions on immigration reform, on voting, on abortion rights, on environmental policies every single day.
And I want to chime in here and say that I know we sound a bit biased. I know we sound a bit biased, but I want to caveat this point here. For a very long time, I was no party affiliation. I tried to be independent, right? But then very quickly realized that, especially because I was going into politics, I had to pick a side. Not very many of us can be like a Bernie Sanders and who could just be independent and do it like that. And even then, you saw he still had to pick a side in order to actually run a national campaign. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that I respect the Republican Party. I don't respect the Trump Party. There is a huge difference. Huge difference. And I want to make sure that I make that distinction very, very clear, because a lot of people probably will hear this, people who may be on the right side of the aisle, who aren't on the left side of the aisle, like it seems like some of us are here, and they might be like, oh, well, this is biased or whatever. No, it's not. For a very long time, I understand the Republican ideals. They're conservative about fiscal policy. They're conservative about, values and all that, family values, 100%. Most of us who are Caribbean, most of us usually kind of align with the Republican Party because of how we've been raised and because of how our family raised us. But what's happened is that the Republican Party has been usurped by Donald Trump and all of his crazy, people who follow him. And I don't know what happened. They have sold this country down the river. Republican Party, who used to be so conservative about the national debt, blew a $2 trillion hole in it. The Republican Party, who used to be so conservative about, like taxes and this, that, and the other, and whatever. Yeah, they're defending their billionaire friends' pockets, but they're not looking out for individuals like you and me. So when we sound a little biased, I just want to make sure I caveat that with why. Because the people who are in office take advantage of the power that they have. And so when you talk about, these judges being appointed, Obama was in office for 8 years, and he was intentionally upheld from being able to appoint judges to fill those vacancies that Trump is taking so much advantage of right now, right? It was intentional. It was very intentional to keep those seats open and that's what the Republican Party does so well. They are very good at staying focused and keeping their eyes on the prize. But sometimes the left, we kind of get a little too sidetracked with all the little bells and whistles, and we forget like the real things that will affect our lives 20, 40, 100 years from now. 40 years from now, the two judges that Trump has appointed at the Supreme Court level, they'll probably still be there. And that's what we have to keep coming back to, that it's all a matter of, don't forget the end goal. Keep that in mind. Don't forget the end goal. What's the end goal? Making this country better, making this world better, talking about climate change, talking about all that stuff, talking about the future, talking about our kids, talking about education, police reform. It's all about making things better. And we are allowing for other people who don't give two stuff about our future to lead it. And they keep appointing judges and appointing people who say, I don't care about Amendment 4. No, felons are felons. They don't get to vote again, regardless of if they went to jail for selling weed or something. They're a felon. They can't vote anymore. Are you serious? But a person who, committed murder is basically considered the equivalent of the person who was selling weed. It is asinine, but it still happens. And that's what we have the right to change. We have to take advantage of the right to change that. And you think about this current ballot right now, there is another initiative, one of the amendments that's on the ballot, that's us. That's, people, regular people who also put that amendment, I think it's the second amendment that talks, or the third amendment that talks about the minimum wage. That was another ballot initiative. That was not politicians who decided to put that, even though we've been asking for this for years. It was the people who did that. It was also the people who will determine whether or not that actually passes. And we can raise the minimum wage here in Florida $10 and keep it incrementally raising to $15.
So, you guys all brought up really great points. And this brings me to my process in the research that I was doing. And I was like, if I'm going to have this talk, I need to know what I'm talking about. I need to know some language, some this, some that. I gotta sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I actually did some research, and I found out that the ballot for my precinct is on the internet. Like I can look at it before. And I know like to me, like to you guys who are a little bit more experienced in the world of politics and voting, you're like, of course, like you should have known. Like, but for me as a person, like this is my first time really diving into politics. And I was like, wow, like this makes it like my dad, who's a Haitian speaker, I can sit with him, and it has Creole in there too, but he prefers to read the English. So I can sit with him and tell him like, go over it before we get in there. We can make decisions together. So I feel like that's like a really important thing. So that brings me to my question is, what do you think are some of the best ways for someone to research who's on the ballot in their area and the different policies that the candidates stand for?
Ballotready.org.
All right, I'm gonna link that in the caption, the description. There we go, the description.
All the candidates, all the amendments, it explains everything. It gives you why yes, why no. It doesn't make a decision for you. It just gives you the facts, straight facts. Ballotready.org.
Write that down. Anyone else have any good, any things that they do themselves or that they've learned through their process voting?
Yeah, so I would say definitely you should reference a lot for your local supervisor of elections website. You can go on there and easily, first of all, see who has filed. And a lot of times you'll see people say, hey, I'm running for office, and they haven't really filed yet. So you can really go on there and see who has filed. You can also see how much money they have on hand. You can go to, I forgot the website, maybe Christina could help me with this. It's, I think it's Division of Elections. There's a website where you can see the donations each candidate has taken. I'm not sure if that's the website, but there's a website if you look it up, or you can look at the treasurer's reports, which should be on the local city's website or the SOE's website. Where you can see who is donated to the campaign. So people just can't be out there saying one thing, but they're taking money from other people who may have underlying interests behind their dollars. I think that's extremely important. I think what you said as well, how you can really look up your ballot, I think that's such a big thing. And you actually reminded me that I had to do it for somebody, and I printed theirs out. And this was a regular conversation. I was at a corner store, and I walked into the corner store, and then a commercial came on TV like, vote, be ready to vote. Oh, make a plan to vote. That's what it said, make a plan to vote. So I asked them, you heard that? What's your plan to vote? And we just struck up a conversation like that. And she was like, she's talking about Trump and Biden and all of this. And I just switched it straight to local stuff. I was like, how do you feel about this? You know, how do you feel about this commission? Those signs that you see up when you drive down Oakland at 441, do you know those people? No, but I always see them like, okay, well, I could bring a ballot for you. So that was yesterday, and I'm going to bring it to them tomorrow. And that's, you know, these are just everyday things you can tell people. And I really feel like there's tons of websites, I'm pretty sure, similar to Ballot Ready, where these third-party websites kind of help aggregate some of that together for you. So, you know, just go searching. You'll be surprised what you'll find. A simple Google search about your candidate would bring up a lot. And if your candidate doesn't have a place where it's accessible to know about them, I think that should tell you a lot about that candidate. The candidate's information should be easily accessible. They should have their points laid out, easily read on their website. And if they're not doing these things, then at the very least, it tells you how serious that they take their campaign.
Anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, they pretty much covered it.
So what advice would you give to someone voting for the first time, whether that be someone who just turned 18, someone who just became a citizen, or someone who just finally decided they're ready to register and they registered to vote? What advice would you give them?
All right, let me start this off. So a person who's voting for the first time, and I've had cousins who kind of, you know, transitioned from Haiti into the States, and I basically told them, do what you can to get your feet wet, but also do it to get yourself uncomfortable. And the reason why I say that, I tell them that, is that I've seen family members who got so comfortable doing what Christina has said earlier before, just seeing this whole presidential election thing, seeing, you know, the president kind of using the bully pulpit to kind of address as much as he can, or um, to kind of put some sort of narrative out there, and then from that, then getting blasted in their face. That's when they kind of like make their decision of whether I'm going to vote for this person or not. Um, get involved in campaigns for certain people who are running, you know, phone banking, canvassing. Do something that gets you involved in the process so you kind of have a better understanding as to what it takes to get in that position and what they are willing to commit to you as their constituent. That's what I usually tell people.
Anyone else?
I would say, first and foremost, congratulations. Welcome to the party. Voting is just, it's such a, when you take away all the extra fluff, it's just something that you should do that should just be another Tuesday, or should just be another Thursday. It should just be a thing that you do, that you just do it and you're like, okay, let me go cook dinner now, right? Like, that's what voting should be. That's really all voting is. And make it a habit, make it something that you just do all the time. And the best and easiest way to do it is to actually vote by mail. As controversial as voting by mail has become in this election, intentionally, it's very intentional. Please be mindful that everything is done with a plan in place. Everything is done to prevent you from doing what you should be doing. But the easiest way to vote is to vote by mail. I vote by mail. Now, let me be very, very cautious in how I tell you to vote by mail. Get your ballot to come to your house, and then you go drop it off at your supervisor of elections office. Don't put it in the mail. Don't put it in a box that you don't know whether or not that box is real or not. Drop it off to your supervisor of elections office or to one of your early voting sites. Do that. So get your mail. That way, like, it guarantees you voting, because if it comes to the mail to you, you can't forget, right? You can't be like, oh, shoot, I forgot to vote. Or shoot, I forgot to put it in the calendar. My bad, I forgot it was November 3rd. I thought it was November 4th. God forbid, right? So please order your ballot, have it come to your house, vote in your underwear, I don't care, and then go turn it in. That's it.
Yeah.
And do it for every election.
Every single time. I want to chime in and say, to me, this question is so personal, because I was once somebody who didn't believe in voting. I was once the person that was like, my vote doesn't matter, and this system, that, and the third. So yes, Christina, trust me, I was one of those people hard. And a lot of my friends, I've convinced to get, to vote for the first time. Not a whole bunch of them, but definitely a handful who was close to me, and they really look at you and they say, listen, man, I don't do this, but because you coming to me, I would do this for you. You know what I'm saying? And I really take that personal. And I've taken that even more personal, because I realize, so if you have somebody who's going to vote for the first time, I think it's important to get them in the frame of mind that, listen, this is just your first time voting. All right, this is just a strategy, because we know what this particular candidate can do, and whatever. I back to the issues. I try not to make it. I try to let them know, like, listen, man, we just trying to get out there and let them know we here. And this is important, because you may get them to try to be so gung-ho about a candidate, and then this candidate goes out there, does something, and then all of a sudden they now look at this person and be like, wow, I voted for that person. And dang, see, that's why I don't vote. That's why I don't get involved in politics. You see what I mean with it? And now you've lost that person. I don't even know how to really get them back. So I really take this personal, and because I don't want to be out there like I'm playing people. So I really stick to the strategy part of it. And I say, listen, yes, congratulations. This is the first step to something so major. This is just you voting and you getting to understand just the basics of things, so we can do this next. Once election, I'm pretty big on telling people, let's do this now, and let this be the first thing to doing things after the election. Because there's so many things that need to be done throughout the year, and not just around voting, like so many things. So I really, when I go to people and I tell them to vote, I really try to get them to understand what frame of mind to be in when they go to the ballot box.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next question. So, My next question, you guys have brought it up individually in your respective answers about voter suppression and the different ways that it's come up more recently, but also it's been something that has happened since the beginning of time in this country. So my question is, what is voter suppression? Just in case anyone is unaware of what it actually is, and what are the ways that it has shown up and affects certain communities in America. Oh, it has affected certain communities in America over time.
So, in a nutshell, voter suppression is any sort of initiative, measure, action taken to ensure that a person cannot vote. Um, and in some instances, historical instances, it's been used to actually oppress a minority group.
I think he froze.
Okay, it wasn't me. Okay.
Okay, yeah. It was me too.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'll finish where he left off. It's meant to prevent you from taking advantage of your God-given American right. Okay, it is a right. It's not just a privilege; it is a right. If you have the ability to vote, you are an American citizen. You were either born here or you became a naturalized citizen, and you're able to vote. You have to. You should. Shouldn't even be a topic of debate. Just take advantage of it. But what suppression is and Nafessah did an excellent job of pointing this out earlier. She said, "Why do you think they do so much to prevent us from voting? Why do you think they suppress our vote so much?" It's because they know the true power that comes behind voting, and voting consistently, not just one time, not just every 4 years, but voting consistently in every election and every ballot measure. On you vote just because it's fun, right? Like when you vote like that, you become a scary group. You become like the Jewish community has become, where no one blinks an eye without them being involved, right? You become like certain, like, white women. You become like them, like white women tears, right? It's the same thing with voting. Like you vote and people pay attention. Yep. People are not going to just throw you under a couch somewhere. They're going to pay attention. So suppression is intentional because it's the knowledge that we don't want this particular group of people to vote, because if they vote, then we can't do this that we want over here for this particular group. And the more we keep them busy, working 2 jobs, broke, struggling, then we know voting isn't a priority, and we can keep running the country the way we want it to run. That's all it comes down to.
Yeah, I think earlier Nafessah made an excellent point starting this off. I was interested to hear if she wanted to touch on this a little bit, and I think this is your thing here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like I said before, like every point in history they have tried to get us to not get to the polls, and I want people to also remember, like, voter suppression is not just felons can't vote. States have become very creative on how they have tried to keep us from the polls, right? We have new voter ID laws where you have to have a driver's license, right? Some immigrants they might just have an ID. They may just have a social security card. Different states are getting real creative. Voter purging. So, if you don't vote for a certain amount of elections, they're just gonna wipe you clean and you gotta register all over again. So people get to this election and they're like, I think I'm registered, I'm waiting for my ballot. Don't even realize that they have been cleared off the system for names that are registered to vote. The list really goes on and on. Even now in COVID, we have a new form of voter suppression, mail-in ballots. This whole scandal with the post office, trying to insinuate that there's so much fraud when it comes to voting by mail, and that's literally less than 2%. I mean, not even a real issue. There have just been so many creative ways that states have tried to get people to not get to the poll, and it disproportionately affects communities of color. And I think, especially in this election, what we don't realize, there's power in the Black community and minority communities, which they know, but they also know when Democrats come out to vote, Republicans can't win. It as a numbers game. They cannot win. The 2016 election went the way it did because people did not go and vote. I'm not going to put on the Black and brown communities because it is not our duty to save the world. However, there were people by counties who did not go and vote, right? And some of that was probably voter suppression, right? And some people staying at home, but voter suppression is a real issue. It's now come in many forms, and people have to realize the rights that they have. Only 35 states require you to bring your driver's license to the poll, right? So you may have poll workers turning you around because you don't have an ID. That right there is suppressing your vote, right? And imagine the amount of people who just go home and say, oh, forget it, I'm not gonna go back, right? So it takes a lot of forms, and it's a real problem, and it's a serious problem given the stakes of this election.
Yeah, I wanna jump in with that. Super excellent point, especially with the part of purging the rolls, of the voting rolls if you don't vote. And I personally feel like that is such an attack on, I mean, it's all a numbers game. So when they look at people get excited to go vote, like Obama, for instance, they're like, okay, let them vote for Obama in 2008 and 12. They're not going to vote again. And then when those years go by, all of those people are purged. And it's all a numbers game because they know how to understand the voter psychology. And it is true, Democrats tend to focus more on the excitement of turning out to vote versus the other conservative base. They vote more traditionally. And things get a little more slippy when you have to always rely on the excitement. That's why it's so important to make voting a thing, So I think that's super important. Another major part that is super major with this is this thing called gerrymandering, where they will specifically take legislative districts, even in some cases, county districts, and slice up Black communities. So there's no centralized Black vote. And then when you have that happening, now you have races where, it's just a very much cookie cutter. You'll ask yourself, why these districts cut so much? Why didn't they just go in a straight line with? Because they're trying to dilute the Black vote. Imagine if you had a community where there's a white commissioner, and then Black people could really determine who that next person is if they turn out. And they don't even take the chance to wait for us to realize that. They just start chopping up the districts from now. So this is a very, very huge issue. Along with the census comes redistricting that we're going to be doing here in the state of Florida. So, it's such a huge numbers game, y'all. It's not just about voting. It's not just about doing the census. It's about how does that create a baton to now do the next thing with that information, with that initiative that you've taken.
Like I said, Easton is one of the most important people in this conversation tonight because he brought up gerrymandering and he brought up the census and he brought up how, again, voter suppression is not even just, oh yeah, they won't let me vote, they ask for my ID, they are talking about vote by mail. It's all the systemic stuff that they do, that they build into our society that prevents us even more so from voting. And, I use myself as an example. The only reason I won in 2016 when I ran was because we taught our community how to vote by mail, because we knew they probably wouldn't turn out on Tuesday, that election day. And I remember having a specific conversation with a woman, my little Haitian woman. She was so cute. I was like, Mommy, I need you to go vote. And she's like, honey, I'm doing laundry. Can I go tomorrow? It's election day, mind you. I'm like, sis, there is no tomorrow. It's today or never. I need you to go vote, please, for me. And she did. She dropped her laundry. She went and voted. Thank God. My election was determined by 6 votes. There was a 6-vote differential that determined whether I was going to win outright or whether I was going to go to a runoff head to head with the incumbent that I was challenging. So it made a huge difference to have that community go out and not just to go out, but to give them the convenience of having the ballot come to them and remove the barriers of they need a ride, or they got to get to the polls, or they got to remember what day to get to the polls. They're there between 7 to 7. What about those nurses who work 7 to 7? They can't get to the polls on election day. So you think of all those other just barriers to voting. Forget the suppression. There's so many things that stop us from just being able to just cast our voice out loud into the abyss of the noise that they try to create to distract us. it's so intentional. So that's why I'm saying vote by mail, like vote by mail. And I don't necessarily mean send your ballot in the mail. I just mean request your ballot to come to you and then turn that ballot in, because I voted since the beginning of October, right? I voted a month out from the election because my ballot hit my inbox, my mailbox at like over October 1st or something. I voted, dropped it off, and now I'm just sitting here just like counting the days. That's how easy voting was when you just vote by mail. So it's about a re-education thing. And the more we teach our community to take advantage of the convenience of voting by mail, we'll see that our turnout numbers will increase.
Thank you. Patricio, we lost you earlier. Is there anything you want to add?
Okay. So let me start with something that I've kind of did a study on. So in my undergraduate year, I did a directed independent study on how social media affects the polarization of your average citizen. And in doing so, and kind of like researching other stuff and watching certain videos, reading articles, I found that number one, let me say this, is that Christina and Easton are right. Black folks vote at a higher clip than the Latino community and the Asian community. So our vote is something that is a target. So what I found out is that during the 2016 election, you had a lot of bots that showed up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And what they essentially did is they kind of co-opted a lot of events to try and sow dissent concerning voting in our community. So what they would do is they would kind of like, throw something out there, kind of like throw these little memes about, Pan-Africanism being Black and woke, and not to say that this is a bad thing, but what they were essentially doing was garnering trust. And then when there was some event that happened, such as like, a police shooting, somebody dying in our Black community because of that, then they would start spreading all these memes and all these tweets and stuff saying that your vote doesn't matter anyways. This is the reason why you shouldn't be voting. There was one specific Twitter handle where it said woke Blacks, and they found out that this Twitter handle was actually being run by a Russian bot. And it was basically just kind of throwing all these things out there. And then whenever there was an opportune situation, they would say, okay, this is the reason why you shouldn't trust the government and don't go out and vote. I tell my friends a lot that, that have this mindset and that say, what does it matter anyways? What's my vote going to do? And I tell them that your vote could be the deciding vote for something that you are actually passionate about. Another thing that you guys were throwing around was mail-in voting. So there have already been tallied millions of votes that have been turned in through the mail, and there's this kind of thing that's been talked about now called the blue wave. And this is why Christina was saying that them discrediting mail-in ballots is intentional, because we're in a midst of an election where we will not know who the president is the night of the election. We may not even know it the week after. And the reason why is that we are in a pandemic where a lot of people will be voting by mail. So if you discredit this mail-in voting, where more people vote by mail on the Democratic side than the Republican side, what essentially is going to happen is you might see at the onset that Trump, the Republican candidate and the incumbent, may show that he has more votes that night of, maybe the next day and maybe the next day after. But as these mail-in ballots starts getting tallied and tabulated, you might see that start to shift, and this is why they're calling this the blue wave. So they're having a strong push against mail-in voting because they know that as the days keep rolling on, whatever lead that they may have, even when we're talking in an electoral college, because they can't place their votes until all the votes have been tallied in that manner. So this is all a coordinated effort to suppress your vote. It's not just, purging the rolls. It's all these little different things that are constantly targeting the Black vote because they know that it can be a swaying factor.
I think you guys all brought up really great points, and I think that these are all things that people should be cognizant of when they're voting. With that being said, I'd like to remind everyone to check on your registration, make sure that you're registered to vote, make sure that your address is correct, because I know for me, I had a personal experience where I voted in college and I'm on a college campus and there's a vote and there's a poll there where I could vote and my address was still my home address. So when I went to the line, there's like a long paper for you to fill out. It's time consuming, but someone else in line told me you can just make a phone call and change it in 5 minutes. So I changed mine in 5 minutes while everyone else was still standing in line, and nobody in line knew that. And I was like, why are they giving them these papers or these forms when they can just change it over the phone? So I had to tell a couple people, I'm like, listen, like you can change it over the phone and do it. So it's like, I don't know. I'm not going to say that that's a form of voter suppression because I don't know if it's intentional, but the confusion in that is a way that you could get distracted and it can be confusing. So just make sure, like Christina said, voting by mail is one way to avoid all that confusion in advance. But if you are going to go, wear your mask, but make sure, check on your registration and make sure you're registered, make sure the address is right, make sure all the information is right. And that brings me, yeah.
One last thing about voting by mail. The vote by mail phenomenon is not new. The vote by mail phenomenon has always been being used by the Republican Party. That's how a majority of them have always voted. But now that the secret is out of the bag, now that the cat is out of the bag and it's a national phenomenon for people to vote by mail, all of a sudden, it's corrupt. The mail, there's so much fraud. Don't vote by mail.
Yeah, that's really,
okay. Like don't come for me. Don't.
That's really the honest truth. Like they used to brag about voting by mail from their yachts and everything and their backyard. They used to talk about this, and then we see the results come in. They used to say, "Oh, it's the vote by mail they're doing." So most definitely.
So talking about this next election, we've touched on the local levels, and one of the biggest, everyone's eyes right now are on this presidential election, and it's a big one. And I want to know how you guys feel about the next presidency and how it will affect or have the potential to affect the effect that it'll have on Congress, the Senate, and the judiciary levels. Because obviously those are federal level things that are separate from our local elections and local officials.
If I can kick this off, I'll be very brief. If you vote Trump back in the office, everybody's talking about trying to catch him on X and X, fraud or, whatever legal activity. He's stacking the judges and the Senate on purpose. So even if something does go up the ranks, it definitely, he's a little bit more immune to certain things. So I just want to say that whenever you vote anybody in office, it's not just about him. When you vote anybody in the office, they get privileges to appoint people. And as far as holding people accountable, they can put people in positions to keep things stacked against you. And I think that's what ties into when people say elections have consequences. They really do. They really have consequences. I can't get into any conspiracies about who is right or wrong with what, but I do know that when people get in office, it's a strategy to now work things systemically to put them in favor, even for when they're out of office. And that's always been a thing about people in power. They put themselves in power so they can now set the stage up for a lot of times who's next, but also for years to come.
So this election we have a lot at stake because we're going through a lot of pandemics. We're fighting a lot of wars on many fronts. We have police brutality. We have the wildfires in California, which is just insane, representing, we have climate change and global warming issues. We have reproductive issues. Our economy, millions of people are without jobs. people are going to start losing their homes and their apartments. It's just so many fronts. Every part of this country is crumbling, and it's due to this administration. Over 200,000 people have died from a virus due to the lack of leadership, because the fish sinks from the head. So when it comes to this election, we're trying to get to an equilibrium. We're trying to stabilize. So when people are like, oh, I'm not that happy about Joe Biden. Well, I'm not that enthusiastic either, but I'm trying to survive. I'm trying to make sure that my parents don't lose their home, that people get employment benefits and get jobs again. I'm trying to ensure that wildfires are not taking over people's homes. I mean, we have a lot at stake just to make sure that we can live to see 2022. So when people are talking about this election and they don't like people, like, it's life or death right now on all fronts. In Congress, needing to pass new legislation for crime reform, also with the Supreme Court has a lot of key cases that they are about to rule on when it comes to transgender rights, when it comes to reproductive rights, when it comes to qualified immunity. There are so many things at stake. So when you're voting for, we don't really care about Biden and Kamala Harris, there are so many things that we just have to get back to equilibrium. Like, please, let us just get back to times where we're a little normal, right? And I think if we just keep that in mind of like, voting is just the beginning, right? So after we cast our ballot and whoever wins, this is step one. We now have to hold these people accountable for the next 4 years. If Trump wins again, I cannot guarantee that I will be in this country. My parents are from Ghana. I may have to leave. However, if we have a favorable election, that is not the end. It is the beginning. We have so many fronts that we have to A, hold them accountable on, and B, really push to ensure that we make it the next 4 years, because a lot is at stake and we could lose a lot of the remaining rights that we have.
Nafessah, are you born here?
Yes, absolutely. Like everyone else, I'm first generation born here, but my parents are from Ghana and my mom Ghana by way of the UK.
No, I just had to ask because I see a potential Kamala 2.0 happening here. So I had to make sure that you're eligible.
Yes, I'm a citizen. I was born here.
There you go. Okay, I just want to make sure that you're eligible to become the next president of the United States.
Most definitely.
I'm girl. I'm just.
We won't ask you for your birth certificate. I promise.
Right,
And you know what? Like, just to kind of follow off of that, like, I am not born in this country. I am a Haitian immigrant. I was born in Haiti. I came to America when I was 6 years old. So as much as I would love to say one day I could go in that trajectory, I never, ever can. I will never be able to run for president of this country. But I can support somebody like Nafessah. I can support somebody like, who sees themselves going in that direction and will change the world for the better and put us where we should have been years ago. So I got your back, girl. You let me know when you're ready.
All right. Patricio, did you want to have anything to add, or should I move on to the next question?
I mean, since you asked, essentially, elections affect just about everything. We talked about the packing of the courts. We talked about how we're in this situation now. We talked about how your legislators, even down to the local level, are the ones who are passing the laws. And I'm not sure what much more that can be said, but there's one thing I do want to note is that governors, presidents, they are the main enforcement tools and engines for these laws that get passed. There was news that was coming out when the pandemic was breaking further and further, and how the Trump administration had gutted that agency that Obama had put together to combat something like this if it were to happen. And so now people seeing this, I tell them, these are the kinds of things that you're voting for as well, not just for the person, but how that person is going to lead this nation when something like this happens. And us as Americans, we have a privilege to be kind of insulated from certain things that happen outside of our borders, because when H1N1 was raging other countries, it barely hit us because of how responsive and how they started dealing with it from the jump. But we also are now witnessing what happens when that isn't in place and how it affects our lives. And I want people to really understand this when they're voting, that the next person can potentially have this done again, extend this, or God forbid, you have a loved one that gets affected and there's a tragedy at that point.
You bring up a very good point that actually leads me into my next question. With over 200,000 deaths from Corona and the numbers still rising to this day and thousands unemployed, do you think that the pandemic will have an effect on the way that people vote? And have you heard any plans from candidates in your community that encourage you to vote in their favor?
Ooh, I'll just start. I hope this localizes the power of voting, right? So we see, because we had a present or lack thereof of leadership from the top, we had to go to the states. So now every state is operating on its own to figure out, how do we have to wear masks? Do we close this? Do we close that? So number one, I think people saw governors and all the way down to mayors hold a lot of power when it comes to enforcing regulations or laws at a drop of a hat, right? A governor can just come on and say, hey, we're going to open up the clubs. The mayor of the city of Miami can just say, oh, well, I'm going to keep the beaches closed, right? So there's so much power that goes all the way down to the mayor when it comes to saving lives, because we don't have leadership from the top down. So number one, I hope this shows people look at how their local powers are dealing with COVID, or the lack thereof, and showing how this has a direct correlation with the lives that have been lost. And two, we are not out of this pandemic by any means. So when it comes to this transition of power, we're going to have to see how the governors, all the way up to the president, deal with the lasting effects of COVID. Forget the vaccine part. This COVID has shaken people's employment, their housing security. So there's a lot at stake. And I hope that it just shows that your local power, like your local government, has a lot of power when it comes to creating laws and enforcing them.
So I'll jump in here, because I am a local government, advocate strongly till my dying day. I still will be a very strong local government advocate. And just give an example of what our local government was able to do when the federal government failed Americans, right? So when the whatever they call them, like the different bailouts that they tried to do to help local businesses and everything, when those came out, and instead of giving them to the people, they gave them to the banks, and the banks got to choose who they were going to divvy out money to, and they chose, who else? Their most highest net worth clients, and left everybody else to fend for themselves. The little people who own the little corner store on the corner, the little people who have little, like the little Caribbean market, nothing. So the city of Boynton Beach said, we're going to help out as much as we can. We've given out, since the pandemic started, over $1.5 million to local businesses to help them, giving it upwards of about $10,000 to each business that applied to us. I know of personally, I made sure that my little Haitian restaurants and different, Black owned businesses who were struggling, I told them, this is the application. I would personally send them the link to make sure that they applied and they were able to get those funds. And, I know of like a car repair shop that took advantage of our forgivable loans, and was able to keep his employees on board, was able to keep things going while, you know, everything was shut down. And then when things kind of started opening back up, he was able to get things back on track. And those are all forgivable loans, as long as they just, you know, they kept their employees, they followed the different, you know, things that we put in place, that money is theirs. They never have to give it back to us. So those are the things that local government has the power to do. When the federal government fails epically, I'm not even going to try to sugarcoat it here. When they fail epically, we can help pick up the ball and help save normal people like you and I, who are sitting here struggling and who are like, how the heck do I, you know, a small business owner not only takes care of themselves and their family, they take care of all the employees that are under their purview as well. So that's dozens of families that are struggling if that small business goes under. Now, multiply that by all the small businesses that have gone under during this pandemic. Multiply that number by, you know, the unemployment that's happening in this country right now. The service industry, which is where a lot of our Black and brown folks work, is just, it's gutted. It's gone, right? People aren't really going to hotels as much anymore. They're not really going to restaurants as much anymore. It's, how do these people come back? What do they come back to? So local government plays a big role in this. And, you know, and sadly, unfortunately, we're being left to dry. We're being left to dry because the federal government, and all the money that they decided to give out, all the airlines and whoever in Disney World that they're bailing out, they gave nothing to local governments. I'm sorry, y'all gonna get me on a whole soapbox here. So let me get back on focus. So our job is to protect and serve, not just our police and our fire or whatever, but local government, mayors, commissioners like me. Our job is to protect and serve our constituents. And so my job is every day to wake up and protect the 76,000 people that have elected me and that entrust me to protect and serve them. I do that to the best of my ability. And we have to remember that as important as the federal elections and everything is, local government dictates your life.
Okay. Well, we have reached the last question. So out of the 6 amendments that are on the Florida ballot, is there any that you feel particularly strongly about? If you could explain the amendment, what it will do, and where you stand and why. I bring this up because, like I said, I looked at the ballot for the first time recently doing my research, and I had zero idea that we were dealing with minimum wage. Your girl is trying to get paid. Like, I had no idea. And if I didn't look, I would never know. So I don't know the specifics. One of you guys could dive into that. But yeah, like that's one of the amendments that, so I bring up this question because I feel like people think of voting and they only think of candidates and not the other things that are on the ballot.
Okay, so I have a very strong position on Amendment 3. And so just to kind of give an overview of what Amendment 3 is, Amendment 3 is trying to implement a top 2 open primary system for state offices that includes gubernatorial, legislators, and it would include cabinet members as well. Now, what it's trying to do is implement a system where it's an open primary where you'll have Republicans on the ballot, Democrats on the ballot, and independents and others on the ballot as well. This is for the primary, mind you. And what happens is the top 2 people that garner the most votes in that primary are the ones that end up going to that general election. Now, I kind of come at this as a Black voter, and the Black part is kind of what takes over for this because there's an example where if we had this system in place when Ron DeSantis was running against Andrew Gillum would have never been in the general election because he would not have garnered enough votes to even be placed in the top 2. It would have been Ron DeSantis and Adam Putnam, and Ron DeSantis was literally running against Adam Putnam in his own close primary on the Republican close primary. The reason I'm against this specific amendment is because it places kind of, it makes it as if your vote as a Black person doesn't really matter because I'm not going to be seeing the representation of someone like myself end up going into that general election. Another example is if you were to look um, in Broward County, there is a senator, Oscar Brainerd, and the Democratic primary, he was able to garner 74% of that vote. If this thing was in place, he would have garnered only 48% of that vote. And the reason why this is important to me, because if you want to have a discussion about an open primary, okay, let it be an open primary and we can discuss that. But if you're just saying the top two people are just going to go off to the general, then you're essentially making it that, especially with gerrymandering going on and it being so rampant, that Black people are not going to be able to get voted in to these positions and won't be able to represent us in a manner that they have been doing or been fighting for before. And that's why it's so significant to me, because in a closed primary, a Black voter is able to kind of focus on our votes to kind of put them over the hump and to get that position or get that seat that they're wanting. In this top two, essentially, you're just focusing on a broader net of people, and the focus on the campaign may not even be for us because it might just be so scattered at that point. So for me, this is why it's so important, because it feels as if it's deliberately made when it says top two open primary to have our voices kind of diminish in the election and campaign.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. That's one of the amendments that I vehemently oppose. And the other amendment that I oppose, somebody please help me by telling me what the number is, but it is the amendment that speaks on for any constitutional amendment to happen or for any laws to be enacted within the state of Florida, it would have to go through 2 election cycles for it to happen. That right there is straight trash. Okay, just take it, throw it in the trash. Do not vote for that amendment. That amendment is, again, another way to usurp what the will of the people is. So we talked about Amendment 4 earlier. We're talking about the amendment that's on the ballot right now that talks about raising the minimum wage to $10 effective next year, and then raising it incrementally to $15 over the next 5 years. Those amendments, in order for them to pass, would have to go through this election cycle, be passed at a 60% threshold, then come back in 2022, be put on the ballot again, and be passed at a 60% threshold. So it would have to be voted on twice for it to actually become law.
That's Amendment 4, by the way.
Amendment number 4, by the way.
Amendment 4, thank you. So, no, hard pass, okay, no. So that's just appalling. I mean, they just keep inventing more ways. I can't keep up. They keep inventing more ways to just stop. Please stop the madness. Let them know to stop the madness and vote no. All right? Okay.
That's egregious at that point. Having to do that twice.
Yeah, you got to go through round 1, round 2. But I also feel like whenever I see stuff come up like that, a lot of money go behind these amendment initiatives. What are they seeing that's making them trying to pass this in the first place? And a lot of that is what I try to look at. Like, what type of trend are they noticing that they're trying to all of a sudden, circumnavigate? So I think that's something to pay attention.
Yeah, just for like making sure everyone does vote for the amendment to raise the minimum wage. I've heard some rhetoric on Twitter about, I don't want to vote for that because that means the price of milk and bread, they're going to go up, or my rent's going to go up. Newsflash, that's all been going up. Rent has been going up, cost of living been going up, food has been going up, but the minimum wage has stayed the same, stagnant for years. So just to let people know, you are voting, raising the minimum wage is going to have no effect on your cost of living going up. This is because the minimum wage has not accounted for how much or more expensive everything in this country has gotten. So it's not going to take from you to put on someone else's plate. We're trying to get everybody to a point where their wages can even meet to zero out their costs that they are enduring to live in this country. So just to be clear, no one's going to take from you by voting for this amendment. It's necessary, it's long overdue, and it should go up even more than 15 at this point. And the whole gradual scale is a joke to me.
Yes,
it should shoot right up to $15 in 2021 and go up every year constantly. The review, and it says you have, so by 2026, they're going to review it again. Another way to stall. But for the present, I hope everyone votes for that amendment.
100%.
Okay. I need people to understand that Florida's minimum wage is $8.46. A full-time worker getting paid that would be raking in $17,600 per year. Okay? That's it. And that's supposed to be considered a livable wage in the state of Florida, let alone South Florida? No.
We live in South Florida, but it's not necessarily like the rest of the South. It's definitely, I feel like it's like Miami is not Georgia. Like it's not the same. I feel like it just, it's time. It's time. So I appreciate you guys.
And it's still too little too late. It's still not even enough. But I mean, we'll take it, but they could do so much better. Yeah. Just saying.
Yeah, but that's why we're all here, to have this talk, to get some change, to get something going, because it's time for things to change. I mean, it's been time for things to change, but I'm hoping that this conversation informs a lot of people and gets them thinking and gets them excited to go vote. I'm going to be linking everyone's, I'm going to give you guys a chance to do your outros and share your information, your socials, and how to reach you, and if they want to get involved with you and things like that. But I'm also going to be linking resources for you guys, the website that she mentioned, all the dates that you need to know, everything that's important. I'll be linking that too. And then feel free to reach out to me personally if you want some resources, because I have some that I'm more than willing to share. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys introduce yourself, say your goodbyes before I let you go. Ooh, do I get to pick? Okay. Nafessah, you can go first.
Okay, stop. Okay. Just again, Talia, thank you for this platform. Thank you for this really open and candid, much needed discussion that needs to be had and needs to keep being had amongst the Black community and amongst our 35 and under folks. We just need to keep opening these doors and keep getting the knowledge and the truth into people's ears and brains. Again, I am grateful for the opportunity to serve my community. Even though I serve in the city of Boynton Beach, I serve anyone who wants to come and find the information. I'm more than happy to help. So just search my last name. It's pretty uncommon, so you should easily be able to find me on any platform, Twitter, Facebook, IG, wherever, Romelus, and you'll find me. So thank you and have a great night. Be blessed and go vote.
All right, I'll chime in. Thank you so much, Talia, for creating this space, for having us all here. I think there was a lot of insightful discussion that we had here, and I hope it doesn't stop here, and I hope that this inspires everyone, especially the young folk, to use their platforms, whether it's on social media or even talking to your family about the power of voting, and that, this is the beginning and not the end. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to share my story and my opinions, and my social media handle on my Instagram is @_FEESAH, so or _Fessah. So I'm always willing to talk to people, especially Black and brown people who want to go to law school, especially. We need more attorneys and we need more Black women attorneys. So I'm always happy to be a source of information.
And judges. We need more Black women judges.
Yes.
I might need to hit you up on, applying it to law school and stuff, but after.
So yeah, I could jump in. Natalia, thank you so much for hosting this amazing panel. This panel was actually one of my favorites for this year. I must say, I really enjoyed this discussion. So thank you for putting such a great thing. Also, thank you to all the other panelists, all of your ideas and insight, I think added a lot of fruition to this panel. So yes, definitely a round of applause to you all. Anybody who wants to get in contact with me is super easy. You can either email me at eastonkh@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram at EastonKH. And I followed Christina and Nafessah, so I'm expecting a follow back. I'm always open for discussion. I'm a very easy to reach person. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So I'm super happy to help.
All right. Thank you for this platform. Definitely the people that were involved in this discussion, this panel had a lot of insight and it was great. If you do want to follow me, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I don't use it that much. And Facebook. You can just type in my name and I'm sure it'll come up. Kind of also want to say that I myself have started my own small business during this whole COVID pandemic. So I'm kind of doing that, doing grad school and working, but you got to keep grinding. And I tell people that voting is very important. Do everything in your power to actually put that vote in. Not just this year, but make it a habit of doing it every single time that an election comes up. And just make your voice heard.
All right. And with that being said, I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your night.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Good night.